Hi guys. Oh, blimey. I'm Tom Hadley, Director of Campaigns at the REC. I don't know about you guys, but what could be better after lunch than a deep down dive into IR35, etc. That's one of the themes. So we were asked to sort of talk about that. So IR35 is quite techie, isn't it? Who in the room would think they're sort of kind of deep specialists? People know a little bit about it or not? A little bit about it. So I've got some slides at the end. The challenge I've got is we at the moment we're doing like 4-hour workshops on R35, so trying to condense it isn't easy, but I've pulled together some of the slides which you'll get afterwards. But then if you want to get the more detail, just drop me your card and I'll send you some of the packs that we've got and the information. So it's quite a hard one to condense into half an hour, especially as it was part of a broader agenda around managing a contingent workforce. But we will talk about IR35 in particular. Okay, so jump in whenever you want. You know, so any questions, any feedback, we'll try and make it quite conversational as we go. In terms of setting the scene on flexible staffing, so I was just saying to colleagues, we're just doing our latest Brexit webinar just now in times of uncertainty. I think sort of being able to bring in flexible staff is probably an important outlet, so I think it's important to get it right. I suppose the other two things that are good to mention by intro is one of the campaigns we run, which is the Good Recruitment campaign, is giving us two bits of interesting insight. One is that link between better recruitment and growth and productivity, which cuts across permanent staffing. So if you get the right leaders in, the right people in key positions, that has to have an impact on growth and productivity. But people are starting to realize actually bringing in the right contingent workforce at the right time is also key to that. So that kind of debate around growth and productivity is one that seems to be gaining traction. The other big bit of feedback over the last 6 months is about employer brand. So a lot of employers that we speak to say, we're spending all this money to be seen as this great employer brand, good, but actually we're doing nothing on the contingent workforce. And it doesn't make any sense in a way that you've got contingent workforce in our workplaces going over a terrible impression of us, which is undoing some of the good work we're doing over here. So managing your contingent workforce in a way that also amplifies your employer brand has been a big shift, I'd say, in the last 6 months or over a year. So there's some interesting themes we'll touch on as we go through. In terms of us, so I'm the Director of Campaigns at the REC. We're the professional body for the recruitment sector. We represent about 3,500 recruiting businesses. We work a lot in specific sectors, actually. So anything from engineering, technology to warehousing, healthcare. So very niche recruitment businesses is the ones that we represent. We represent about 11,000 individual members of the Institute of Recruitment Professionals who come on board and join the Institute, etc. I guess the one big message is we're trying to change the way the recruitment industry operates. So all our members have to sign up to code of practice, they have to pass a compliance test, and more we're getting employers saying if we do decide to use an external provider, we're going to make sure they're doing the right thing, they understand the regulations, i.e. they're a member of their recognised trade body. Okay, so that's a good thing to take away. Do have a look, you know, if you are using external providers, are they members of the REC? So that's a little bit about us. In terms of taking stock, I thought we'd just start with some jobs market data. So we produce 2 reports at the REC every single month, and it does help set the scene. One of them, we ask employers what they're planning to do, and we ask about employer confidence in investment decisions. And it's no surprise that it's fallen off a cliff in terms of employer confidence over the last 6 months. But actually, when you ask people are still planning to hire. So it's a strange thing. So we're not very confident in the economy, but we're still planning to hire temporary permanent staff over the coming months. So it's a little bit of a, sort of fluid situation going forward. We also run a particular report called Report on Jobs, where we ask recruiting businesses how many placements did they make in the last month, temp, perm, by sector and by region. So it's actually the quickest insight that you can get in terms of what's happening in the jobs market, because it comes out every single month. So the Bank of England use it, etc. And the picture there, we're seeing that permanent placements have declined for the last 6 months. So every month people are placing less people into permanent jobs. Temporary staffing is growing, but it's quite steady. So that sort of mix between temp and perm is an interesting, dynamic. Strangely, in technology, it went the other way. Actually, it was more demand for permanent technology staff than contractors. So I don't know if that's maybe people are recognising actually it's a good time to try and bring permanent workers in. I'm not quite sure. So they're the sort of trends that we see. I'm always interested to hear from you guys to see if it fits with our own data. What are the hardest to fill roles that you've currently got? So it could be perm, but I'm interested in particular, obviously, because of the theme of today, contractors, interims, temporary staff. What are the hardest to fill jobs that you've got at the moment? So cloud architects, okay, so highly technical, yeah, interesting. Other examples? Hardest to... Beg pardon? Data science, yeah, the whole technology, sort of cybersecurity, data science, good. Actuaries, yeah, yeah. So financial services, that whole is interesting. There's more demand than people think, actually, in a lot of those roles. Any other examples? Hardest to fill roles, biggest nightmare? Financial services? Yes, yes, yes. I thought all this was going to be automated, didn't you? I thought it was all finished. But it's like, so some of our members actually in insurance are starting to see an impact with the automation agenda, but it's certainly not cutting it. Even call centres, people say, well, call centres finished. Actually, no, there's huge demand for people in call centres and sales, so it's interesting. I think some of this might change over the next few years. Any other examples of roles? Treasury? Tax specialists? Okay. It's interesting. So you know when you do a presentation training class and they say, whatever you do, don't put too much information on a slide. But I like to use this one because it shows the breadth, actually. So some of the work we do at the REC is to try and influence the government's thinking on things around skills, but in particular around immigration. So the more specific you can be about the particular roles, these are the hardest to fill roles based on our monthly data, right? So temp and perm. So a lot of these are on here, the ones that you guys mentioned, but it cuts across. So I don't know if you guys saw the spending the review last week, so you got the chance of saying, well, we're getting away from these arbitrary targets on migration, good. But he still kept banging on about the brightest and the best. And we're saying, actually, look at a lot of these job roles, hospitality and other areas where there's a massive need for staff. So it's not just about the technical skilled areas, it does cut across. So again, having that sort of data, both for temp and perm, is a big part of our work. Incidentally, when we come to the immigration debate, one of the biggest challenges that I think we've got in this country is how are we going to replace that? So at the moment, you've got people who come from Europe, who, go into temporary jobs, progress through the jobs market, learn the language, etc. How are you going to have a route for people to come in to this country on immigration, that will replace that in some ways? That's the challenge. So in seasonal work, maybe in agriculture, there's particular programs, but that's going to be something for us to think about. So a lot of big companies working, certainly in the blue-collar sectors, are really concerned about how you're going to replace the workers there. So there's job vacancies. So again, it's relatively steady, but the rise is quite slow. The official data came out today. Again, it's relatively positive. When you dig in beneath, sort of vacancies are going down. So it's a bit of a fluid situation. As I say, the other thing that we track is pay. So pay rates have increased continuously for quite a while now, both for new recruits, perm, but actually also for temp, for temp and contractors. I don't know if that fits with what you guys are seeing. Temp contractors, pay going up. Yeah? So it fits, so it definitely shows. So that's one. What's interesting is the rate of increase is sort of plateauing out. So the feedback we've had from recent events like this is actually, there's only so far you can go with pay as an attraction tool. You've got to think of other things. So certainly on the perm side of recruitment, it's what other things have we got to put into the mix? Purpose, employer brand, all the good things, looking at a benefits package, looking at progression opportunity, all this kind of, in some ways it's the same for temp actually. I think people will move for a bit more money, but there's an interesting dynamic at the moment is how else can you create loyalty amongst your contingent workforce, and it's not just about giving a bit more money. People are starting to do some interesting things, including doing more surveys of contingent workers to see what they're genuinely after and what they think about that place of work. So that was a quick run through on the jobs market. So let's move on to flex appeal. So why are employers using contingent workers? What sort of workforce innovations are we seeing? Maybe let's open up to you guys actually. Anybody doing anything different in the way that you manage day-to-day management of your contingent workforce? Anybody doing anything slightly different, slightly innovative on that? I'll give you a few examples from other employer events we've been to. But anything doing something different? Not really? Okay. Who manages the contingent workforce, would you say? Is it a mix? Is it who's in your organisation? Whose primary responsibility is it? The line managers? Yeah. Some organisations procurement. So who manage the whole? So that's an interesting thing. We'll come on to the end. So who kind of owns this sort of agenda? Because I mentioned the feedback about we're worried about this discrepancy. We're doing all this work on employer brand over here, but then our temporary workforce having a terrible experience over here. It's partly who owns the sort of process. So I mentioned some of the examples of innovation as we go forward. We track this. So what are the drivers of using flexible working? So how does this fit with you? So anybody disagree with this? So there's a number of drivers. Perhaps the top historically has always been sort of covering leave of absence. Okay, but there's some other factors that have really come to the fore, actually. So meeting peaks of demand, yes. This has been the biggest increase, actually. So short-term access to skills. So more employers saying, actually, one reason we're bringing in more contractors, more interims, more temporary staff, because it's a bloody nightmare recruiting perm. So we need to access people, staff quickly, and that's driving a lot of our, our recruitment behaviour there. I don't know why I put this one in. There's a film called The Temp. Anybody seen it? Often, sometimes the temp's not the good person in the film. It's like there's some sort of loophole that the temp's exploited, etc., and is secretly an assassin or something like that. So I will make a note to look at it. The temp to perm rates in this country are quite high, actually, which is interesting. It's really come back strong. So this idea you take temporary workers in quickly, they're doing a good job, because there's lots of demand, we perhaps offer them a permanent position. The reason I'm asking some of these questions about what you're doing differently is because we do need to be aware there's a little bit of pushback in some ways, this whole casualised workforce agenda. Do you remember the zero-hour contracts, then it's gig economy? If we did have a Labour government, it would be one of the areas you'd really focus on. So I think we do need to challenge some of the preconceptions out there. A lot of people I speak to say, well, you'd only work as a contractor, as an interim, as a temporary, if you couldn't find anything else to do, which is factually incorrect, actually. The majority of people who work do so out of choice. So you do need to challenge that, because then what you'll get, if not, is a vast range of other regulations which actually make it harder for you guys to use temporary staffing. So one of the things we're trying to do is capture examples where employers are doing some good thing in terms of managing their workforce. It's relatively low in this country, but it is a very interesting point, because people say to me, when we're part of a European confederation and a global one, and people say, UK flexible labour market is a bit like the US, completely unregulated. I say, hang on. The recruitment sector that we represent has got a huge amount of regulations. You've got the conduct regs, agency work regulator, all sorts, so that's factually incorrect. And I say, even look at the stat, in the UK, there's more people on permanent open-ended contracts than in most other European countries. Why? Because in countries like France, they make a huge use of fixed-term contracts, and we don't do it here. Partly because we don't need to, because there's perhaps less protection. It's easier to terminate somebody within 2 years, but it's relatively low, actually, fixed-term contracts. Yeah, but people are looking at different ways you can bring flexibility, and I think that's a really good, and it touches on some of the other discussions more generally around flexible working patterns that I know have been a theme of other events. So these are some of the drivers. Okay. What's interesting for our sector is when we ask employers, what are you looking for from your partner? So if you do use an external recruitment partner to bring in your temporary contingent workforce, what are you looking for? And yes, quality of service, so finding the right staff is part, but this has been a massive increase. We're looking for expertise. So an agency that can help me, plan. So what's my exposure to EU workers at the current time? How many are likely to go? What's my demographics in my workforce? So drivers is a good example. So how can I plan ahead on some of this stuff? What's the availability locally? So deep specialism and understanding regulations. So if I'm an agency and I can show I'm ahead of the game on R35, that gives you the reassurance we're going to bring things in and there's not a compliance issue. So that idea of looking for expertise is something that's really shot up. One of our aims at the REC, and again, this is an open invitation, is get involved in the Good Recruitment campaign. It's a free campaign. It's a network. Some of you perhaps are already members of it. We've got about 500 employers signed up already. So all it is, we come together every so often, a bit like today, and we exchange views on what's happening. We've done a lot about an employer brand recently. So drop me a card if you want. We'd like to get more smaller businesses involved, actually. A lot of it's really big brands, which is great, but we'd like to get more medium-sized businesses involved. What we do with the Good, so these are just some of the employers that have signed up. So it's quite a mix, actually. You got football clubs in there, you've got big banks, you've got sort of public sector, and we quite like that idea, actually. So coming together in a room like this, and you can learn a lot from different sectors as well as from your own. So some of the stuff that we're trying to do is workshops. We do a big conference every year, research reports, and a mentoring scheme, which is proving quite popular. So part of getting people to buddy up on different things. And this is a big one for me, actually, because it does come on to this theme about how you manage a contingent workforce. It's about qualifications. So the employers that have signed up to the Good Recruitment campaign, they say one of the things we'd like, one of our recruitment challenges, you know what it is? It's getting people to come and work in in-house recruitment. That's one of our recruitment challenges. So could we have some sort of qualification agenda which helps to bring people in, that helps to develop people working in recruitment? If you're interested in that, have a look at it. The reason I mention it today is because it's hugely complex, isn't it? Managing contingent workforce, the regulations you got is much more, difficult to get your head around than some of the perm recruitment regulations. So this idea of creating a recruitment qualification has been something that was driven by those who have already signed up. So if you are interested in that, drop us a line, and we're keen to promote that, to get more people working in recruitment as a discipline. We do a lot of research, so I'm happy to send a link to this one. This is where we looked at different recruitment supply chains, and it was fascinating because we asked HR people what they thought was important, how you manage your contingent workforce, and then we asked the procurement guys. So we co-sponsored by CIPD. Any CIPD members here? Quite a few, yeah. And SIPs, who are similar for the procurement community. And it was quite interesting. Obviously, very, very different agendas. Very different agendas. Procurement, how much money can we save? HR, how do we make sure we're not creating some massive risk for us as an organisation by cutting corners, etc. So I guess one of the conclusions is almost trying to join that up, isn't it? Yes, we understand the need for cost control, but if you've got an agenda around staffing which is purely procurement driven, there's issues potentially. There's issues. So again, if you're interested in that work, drop us a line. Happy to share that with you. So that was just a little bit on the backstory and drivers. So final section was looking at some of the external factors. So if you're going back to your business, you think, okay, fine, I can see demand will continue for temporary staffing. Incidentally, one of the drivers I didn't mention I did kind of mention, is choice. So people choose to work flexibly for different reasons. Sometimes it's because it fits with my lifestyle needs at that particular time. I have caring responsibilities. I'm an elite sports person, so I do a bit of temporary work on the side, etc. Sometimes because you want to try different things. I like variety when you get a bit older, maybe, or a bit more experience. It's because I've got a lot I can give. I'm a contractor. I'm an interim manager, and I like the lifestyle. So there's lots of different reasons that people choose to work, and that will not disappear. In fact, it will probably increase. So what are some of the external factors we need to be aware of? I mentioned the Brexit thing because I think that's where we're seeing a huge impact. And some of the employers we've been working with are saying this isn't just, this is real. Our business model is under threat. You go and speak to some of the big warehousing companies, you've got 24-hour delivery models. We can't find the staff to do it. Our business model's under threat. This is serious stuff. So they're asking harder questions of their recruiting partners. But there's quite a lot of government support out there. We're trying to signpost people towards it. It's not easy to navigate, but do have a look at some of the Brexit prep. We've done a lot, as most business organisations have done, trying to preempt what would happen if there was another extension. What would that mean for jobs? How are EU workers responding at the current time? So all these things do come into the mix. So you can't discuss external factors without having a little bit of a Brexit segue, I think, at the current time. But that's it for that. It does some of the other immediate priorities influencing the immigration debate. I've mentioned the Good Work Plan. Anybody heard about this? So this is on the back of the Matthew Taylor review. Does anybody remember that? Modern Working Practices, Theresa May, go and have a look at gig working, zero-hour contracts, contingent workers, etc. And actually his report was quite balanced. He said there's a huge benefit for employers of using flexible staffing. There's also a huge benefit for individuals as long as it's managed properly and as long as it's two-way flexibility. So where he put the focus is when it's not managed very well. And an example of that would be things like late cancellation of shifts. Okay, to rock up and say, there's no work for you. All right, that's not great practice. So that's where the spotlight is falling. A lot of what he found is some of this is about transparency. So people are quite happy to work flexibly, but they don't really understand what sort of contract they're on. And recruitment supply chains have got more complex, haven't they? You've got umbrellas in the mix. You've got different intermediaries. Therefore, we need more transparency. Therefore, one of the suggestions that the government have taken forward is this idea of a key facts document. So quite admin heavy, but every work has to have exactly the same document, etc. So the question for you guys, if you're using a recruitment business for your recruitment, is they should be all over this. So they should be able to give you the reassurance. We know what's happening. We know some of the stuff we're going to have. This comes into force next April. Okay, so not too far away. So there's quite a lot of activity around the Good Work Plan. Anybody know what the Swedish derogation is? Okay, it's fine because it's gone. So it was a model where the agency essentially becomes the employer, and it took you outside of the equal pay requirements under the agency workers regulations, okay? And the government got rid of it. We don't mind too much, but it's just some employers almost had built a business model around it because it was saving them a little bit of money, but that's gone. So quite a lot happening around the Good Work Plan. In terms of public procurement, there's a lot happening there. Again, we're trying to influence this, and this is a big one, apprenticeship levy. Anybody dealing with that? Anybody paying into the levy at the moment? Not so much? Yeah? So it's a challenge, isn't it? And there's a fairly strong business voice about changing the levy. Our biggest single message to going outside of Brexit and immigration is the apprenticeship levy does not work for temporary staff. So a huge number of our members are putting a huge amount of money into a big pot, but apprentices don't really work if you're on a temporary contract. You're not going to be there for 12 months. But there's lots of other training that you could use that money for. So that money that's dormant there, we could use it to upskill a lot of people working in temporary contracts in the contingent workforce. So if you have a look at our website, we've done a big campaign on that. Other business organisations are supporting us. We've got a nice petition out as well, and we think we could train that. So the apprenticeship levy becomes a broader skills or training levy that we can use for contingent workforce. So let's get behind that. And again, it's this idea of progression. Everybody should be able to progress. That's one of the Matthew Taylor message. Doesn't matter what sort of contract you're on, you should always have the opportunities, if you want to progress in our jobs market. So these are just some of the external factors that we need to be aware of. If you have a look on our website, there's lots of stuff on this actually. You can, a lot of it's quite accessible if you're interested in that. So on the off-payroll rules, I'll talk through this quite quickly. I was saying at the start, we do a 4-hour workshop on this. We've got lots of materials. This is coming into force again next April. We've tried to delay it. We're going to keep pushing. I think it's probably not the best time to bring in new tax rules. It's been enforced in the public sector for a little while already. When we speak to HMRC, they say, "Oh, it's such a fantastic success story in the public sector." That's why we're bringing it. That we would counter that. Actually, it depends very much who you speak to. So there's lots of information on the website. I think a couple of things to flag. You can't really see this, but we've tried to create collateral that I'm happy to share with you about, who does what at different points. So I won't go through this because it'll take you, this is like a half-hour slot in some of our workshops. But again, so having clarity about who does what at what time, what means you're inside IR35, what means you're outside. The biggest single challenge I think for us is about the flow. So whose primarily responsibility for determining the status of workers? So are they genuinely self-employed or are they not? So who has to make those status determination decisions is a thing. So it does start with the client, but it's about how you pass it through the chain, etc. Having valid reasons for the decision. So that's one of the things to take back. So we do need to look at the contractors in our workforce. How are they currently working? Are we clear on their status? Okay. And again, how are we going to work with our recruitment partner to pass this along the supply chain? Do our recruitment partners use umbrella organisations? That's the next level. So all these are questions that are good for you to go away and start asking about. There's quite a lot of government scrutiny on this. There's a recognition there's some murkiness in some of these recruitment supply chains. We don't represent umbrella organisations at all. And we recognise that they're in there, so we do need to make sure that there is clarity and transparency for work. Because a lot of people get contact and they're like, "Who's this paying me? I thought I was working for this agency and I'm getting this pay slip from some umbrella organisation." That can't be right. So there are things that we do need to come together as a business community to address. So again, there's lots of, in our guidance, we've got lots of diagram flows which make it quite clear who does what when. So if you want me to send you some of that stuff, happy to do so. Okay. One of the big things is this idea of reasonable care in terms of how you determine somebody's status. So are they genuinely self-employed or are they not genuinely self-employed? Are they inside? Are they outside? Taking reasonable care to do that properly. I'll talk about the CES tool in a little bit because there is some concern that that's not perhaps as good as it could be. But a couple of practical things. Whenever you get a big taxation change, what do you get? You get lots of organisations saying, "We're officially accredited by the government to come and provide you clarity on what status of you were." HMRC have been very clear, they're not endorsing anybody. So just be aware, there's a whole few months of noise about people claiming they've been accredited to do this. So they're being very clear, they're not endorsing any IR35 review companies. Blanket decisions. So this did happen in the public sector to some extent in healthcare. And our take on it is it's quite dangerous to do that, to say, right, all our contractors, because they're doing this, they're all in or out. There's some concerns about that. So would that fit with the test of taking reasonable care, just to sort of say, you give this sort of blanket definition, okay? So again, that's one to be aware of. In terms of the CES tool, so this gets you into the heart of it. So you don't have to be deep specialists on it, but you just have to get some understanding about what people look for when you're saying, are you genuinely self-employed or are you not genuinely self-employed? So a lot of it historically has been about the level of supervision, direction and control that you work under. One of the tests has been things like, if you're ill, would you send in a replacement? So it's not just, it's not like an employee, you can't send your brother-in-law or sister to go and work for you. But if I'm genuinely self-employed, I'm running my own company, then it would be perfectly fine for me to send in a replacement. That's always been one of the tests in there. I was a bit concerned about this bottom one because we've spent a lot of time at the REC talking about better management of your temporary contingent workforce, i.e. treat them as part of the family. You remember all this stuff years ago about whatever you do, don't bring your temp staff to the Christmas party kind of agenda, which in a way is a shame. So I like this idea of treating everybody with respect and having a good workforce ecosystem. Everybody's treated the same. But that is one of the things. So to what extent is the temporary worker integrated into their workforce? It's not easy. I speak to our guys in the construction sector. So that's one of the sectors we represent. UCAT, the trade union, they often go after us. They say, oh, it's terrible. All these agencies making the individual construction workers say that they're independent workers, that they're self-employed when really they're not. And it's completely false, actually. It's not the agencies driving this, and the workers know the game. They'll rock up on site and they've got their own bit of equipment if they were checked. So, no, look, see, I've got my own equipment, So it's not an easy one, to really be clear on. And it's certainly not driven by the agency, certainly not in construction, okay? So these are just some of the tests. The CES tool is something we think could be made a lot better. It's quite techie. We're starting to get some quite techie stuff. But do have a look. The HMRC's website does explain it. We're trying to make changes. So we sit on something called the IR35 forum, which is part of government. So there's regular information coming out of that, etc. So before we move on and just conclude, any questions you'd like me to take away on IR35? Have you guys started doing much work on this? Is it a concern? How are your contractors responding? That's an interesting one. Some people might think I'm going to be getting less pay if I'm no longer...
There seems to be a bit of denial that it's
Yeah.
going to cause any difference to their working life.
Yeah.
And we seem to see that everyone seems to be making the most of the last 6 months. Glory days.
Yeah, yeah. Will it mean more people think, actually, if I'm gonna have to be paying more taxes, should I just go perm? That could. So that's one of the things we're looking at in the REC is what does this mean in practice? What does it mean for contractors? But for employers, it's great that you guys are here because when we did a sort of snap poll, most employers haven't got a Scooby about this. They haven't. There's a complete lack of awareness, and partly because there's so much other stuff to be thinking about, isn't there? There's so much other stuff to be thinking about. R35, what's this? So there is a lack of awareness. So it's great you guys here getting it. So spreading the word on it, I think, is part of what we're trying to do at the REC. So if you're interested in some of the follow-up and some of the packs we've got, I'm happy to send them through afterwards. These are just some of the things that the CES tool helps you to answer in terms of inside, outside, etc. But I thought we'd conclude just looking ahead. So we like to look at the sort of short term, but also the longer term in terms of the future of our jobs market. And it's a good time to be doing that. You know, what kind of jobs market post-Brexit do we want to see emerge in the UK, and what can the business community do to drive that? A lot of the sessions here today are around inclusion, so how do we drive that as a big one? This idea of progression nation. So Amber Rudd, who until quite recently was the Secretary of State, it's a shame, as part of my job is to build links with government officials, and you have to start from scratch. But she started using that same language, progression nation. People come in and they can progress, doesn't matter if they're on temp contracts, etc. It all starts with education. How many of you go into schools, colleges, do talks, do some of that? There's a big need, isn't there? I think there's a big need. There's never been more of a need. And incidentally, part of what we find is useful to discuss, it's not just like these are some of the jobs and some of the skills of the future, etc. Sometimes it's about these are the ways of working. If I speak to a 16-year-old interested in the media, say, well, yeah, that's great, but bear in mind, if you're interested in getting into the media, you'll probably be working freelance. Do you know what that is? Do you know how that works? So there's all these sort of discussions we need to be having, etc. Final couple of conclusions. Recruitment evolution, so radical changes in the way that companies hire, something that we foresee. And there's good work agenda. So good work and flexibility go hand in hand. That's our key message, if we manage it right. So that's why we're trying to sort of galvanise and find examples of good practice, because if not, what will tend to happen is you start to get much more regulatory imposition. Progression nation, you can see these slides were done last week. Things are moving quite quickly at the moment. It's a nightmare, but that was Amber Rudd in our offices again talking about this idea of creating a progression nation. And one of the things that we've found in some of our future jobs work, a lot of this has real implications for managers and leaders, isn't it? So I think future managers, line managers, etc., it's not just about how you manage your own team, it's how do you manage your freelancers, how do you manage your gig workers, your zero-hour contracts, your temporary workers, your interim managers, etc. So there's a big challenge, I think, for the future management and leadership. And final couple of slides is technology. So whenever you're talking about contingent workforce, technology comes into this a lot, doesn't it? Platforms. We get a lot of apps try and join REC. And it's ironic because they market themselves like, you don't need to use agencies anymore, use our app. And yet they try and join us, and then we look at their model. So you're doing the work for an agency, but you're not meeting any of the regulatory requirements of an agency in terms of making sure that's the person they say they are. So there's an interesting debate there. So you don't want to be seen as anti-innovation, and technology's coming into it, but at the same time, you've got to be wary of some of these, you know, new apps and new platforms. Are they legally compliant? Some final thoughts. We all want to avoid this. So I think one of the messages is get involved in some of the debates around immigration, about workforce. So give stories. So we do a lot of work with the CBI, things like that, and they say, look, data is fine, but a lot of work is like examples. Practical examples in your workplace where things are happening. One of the things around immigration which is interesting, which we've started to argue a lot more, this isn't just about business, it's about the other workers. There's nothing worse, and it doesn't matter if you're working in a hotel or in a hospital, the beginning of the workforce, there just isn't enough staff to make the job sustainable. That's what creates stress, all right? That's what really hampers employee well-being. So having enough workers around to help do these jobs is really, really important. And again, having stories about that is really massive. So trying to avoid a Brexit meltdown is one of our priorities. Recruitment's going to get harder. It will. We can just get better at it. Including it's going to get harder to find the right contingent workforce, which is why I come back to this thing, have a little think, what can we do differently in terms of managing our contingent workforce? Do we start doing more surveys? Do we give them access to more facilities? Okay? Do we speak to them differently? Do we have name tags so people can talk to them, but, you know, with their name rather than say, oh, it's just a temp, for example? So looking to do things a bit differently is the other priority. And the final challenge is this. I'm sure we can all relate to it. We talk a lot about recruiting innovation, but at a time when everybody's flat out, it's not easy to do, which is why we try and create this space around the Good Recruitment campaign. If you want to get involved in that, just drop me a card, have a look on the website. We meet every so often, and it's a good place to come just to exchange ideas. What can we do differently? What's worked? Often what hasn't worked. That was a total disaster, don't do it. But it's a great way, and there's never been a more important time, I think, for us to come together peer-to-peer to exchange views. So guys, thanks a lot for listening. I'll be around for a little while this afternoon if you want to come. We have got a stand, I think, out there on the Good Recruitment campaign, so come, I think you can sign up there live. There's absolutely no cost. It'd be great to get you guys involved. Thanks for listening.